All right. Apparently, we are live. Um,
Woohoo.
I hope. We'll see if this is actually working. Um, oh, no. Okay. Um, so, welcome everybody to the very first Cocktail Apocalypse happy hour at the end of the world, where we're going to be talking all things apocalypse. I am joined today by my good friends, Stephanie Buday and Jeremy Anderson. We are
Hey,
all fellow religious studies
Hello.
graduate students and religious studies geeks. So, welcome. How are you both doing today? We'll start, Stephanie. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm
Perfect.
happy to be here today.
Oh, wonderful. And Jeremy, how are you?
I'm doing just fine. Very excited to see what we do here today.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
It's an experiment. It's an experiment. So I thought that since this is the first episode of this, and we are all drinking a cocktail recipe provided by Jeremy in his YouTube channel, Kill Devil. I've been mispronouncing that, Jeremy, by the way.
Mhm.
My intros in the podcast where I've been promoting this, I've been calling it Kill Divill because it's how it was spelled.
Oh,
But Kill Devil, and we'll share the recipe in the video for that shortly. Um, but I thought that since this is the first episode, maybe we should just start with the whole question of, well, what the heck is the apocalypse? So, what is it?
that is a good question. Looking forward to hearing what you
Yeah.
guys say. It's the end of the world.
The end of the world.
Was it?
Yeah. Well, that's certainly what it is in the colloquial
Mhm.
uh, way we think about it. Um, it's not really how we look at it in scholastic terms, but
Right,
it's how it's imagined in the populace. So it's like you
right.
say, the apocalypse. It's everything's going to end and it's going to
Mhm.
be catastrophic. So I think that's how we look at it as a people. But in
Mhm.
a more academic way of looking at it, it's not really always termed as the end of all things, but more like an unveiling,
Mhm.
a revelation. And in fact, one of our books of the apocalypse is actually called The Revelation of John. It's not a it, it is actually an end of the the way the world is currently,
Mhm.
but it's not actually the end.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff that occurs during that time, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I always
So,
think of it as the end of a world rather than the end
mm,
of the world.
yeah, that makes
mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah,
this term apocalypse, does that come out of the tradition,
and
the Christian tradition?
Um,
no, it's go ahead.
oh no, I was just going to say I think that the idea of an apocalypse has its origins probably, and this is something we could do a whole episode on. Um,
Mhm.
Hmm.
in Christianity, it emerges out of the Jewish tradition because there's
Hmm.
this
Mhm.
very strong Jewish apocalypticism that was sort of joined up with a messianic expectation, which is what gives us Christianity. But I think they
Right,
got it
right.
from the Zoroastrians, the
Mhm.
Persian tradition. And I think they kind of picked it up during the Babylonian exile. Um, but I think
Yeah,
the word apocalypse, it's Greek, so the word apocalypse is kind of New Testament. I'm not entirely sure what the Hebrew term for it would be. That's a good question. I have no
Mhm.
idea what the Hebrew term for apocalypse would be.
yeah, they wouldn't have used that term,
Right.
and you're right. It comes out the first book we have that in is the book of Ezekiel.
Right.
Um, Ezekiel 37, chapter 37 through 39,
Mm.
where you have this little apocalypse. It's kind of inserted into the text, and it doesn't really fit. So we don't
Mm.
really know if it was added in But it was written during the time of the Babylonian exile. So it's written during this time of this great upheaval. So it was an end for them in a great sense of their way of life. They're
Right.
uprooted. They're taken off to Babylon, and
Right.
and there they have to live for 60 years. So yeah, it's in that respect, it's definitely an end, and something that becomes just catastrophic.
Well, yeah, the Babylonians destroyed the temple, but here's the question: what was the
Yeah.
chapter and verse that you listed, or the chapter that you listed for Ezekiel, where the apocalypse was?
Chapter 37 through
37.
39.
Well, here's the question I have: is why wouldn't the very beginning of Ezekiel also be counted as part of the apocalypse, where he has that weird vision of the UFOs, according
Yeah.
to some,
Right?
ancient aliens. Yeah, I don't have the hair for that, but I think that with the apocalyptic literature, that's actually one of the hallmarks of it, is that it almost always begins with this weird vision, this sort of extraordinary vision that's full of symbolism. So would you include that very first part in Ezekiel as part of the apocalyptic vision of Ezekiel?
Possibly. Possibly. I'd have to go back and review it. You know, I actually studied this 20 years ago. I was just talking with Jeremy a little while ago. So it's been a little while since I've reviewed the material.
Right.
So, but now that you bring it up, yeah, that is part of his vision that so many people attribute to. He's talking about an angel, is he not?
In the beginning?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Or some people at least attribute it to an angel.
It could be. He sees these four beings, I think, and they each have like four faces, and there is this thing, and this is where people kind of suggest that it's a UFO sighting, because there's like rings within rings and circles, and then there's something that has like eyes all around it that almost sounds like windows of sorts. I know traditionally, I think that Ezekiel's vision is seen as, I don't know if it's the foundation place, but it is definitely deeply connected to an early form of Jewish mysticism, the Merkabah mysticism. That what it's interpreted as is that this is God's throne. Because, in Judaism, you can't see God. Only very few people can actually witness God, but you can see the throne. And so that opens up Jewish mysticism to these very visual kinds of experiences. But I don't remember if they're referred to as angels or messengers in the text.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I got the Bible right here.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people sort of interpret it as if they interpret it as I know a lot of people interpret it as angels or a heavenly host sort of interpretation of it. There doesn't seem to be a connection to the end time events that are really emphasized in the actual text of Ezekiel 37 through 39, where he's actually talking about what's happening at the end times.
Right.
And so I don't know if I would include it. It's certainly a terrifying vision. Anything to do with the heavenly host is always viewed as something terrifying. The angels of the Old Testament in Christianity or in the Jewish Bible are always seen as something that aren't something you really want to come across.
Right, right.
They're they're not they're not the little cherubs that we think of today. They are they're objects of terror.
Right. And this may be a little bit of a tangent, but that reminds me a little bit of fairy culture and fairy folklore, where originally the Fae were terrifying beings of the deep woods and under the earth, but eventually through the course of time and the cultural processes, they became diminutive and is a way of us trying to tame those things.
Is there a fairy apocalypse?
Maybe
I have heard things in recent times, people talking about fairies and fairy culture in apocalyptic manners now to do with climate change. So I would say maybe there's no text dealing with fairies in an apocalyptic manner, but there's certainly ideas of the Fae that carry apocalyptic overtones in how they're viewed today. Like they are not your friends. They are mad. They're angry with us.
Yeah. Yeah, the Fairy King's gonna declare war.
Well, he's got reason.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think that, I had an entire episode. I had a conversation with Dr. Evan Berry from Arizona State about apocalyptic language and climate change, and I think that is something that is also a point of discussion where we use apocalyptic language to discuss so many different things, and it not even within that sort of religious tradition. But there does seem to be something very apocalyptic about the climate changes, this climate emergency that we are currently living in. But there's also a history, of other points. I'm starting to think about, the technological apocalypse as well. What's the term that is often used? The
singularity.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeremy. The singularity. That seems to be almost a kind of technological apocalypse itself, right?
Right. And if you take a look at what AI is doing right now in creative spaces, you have to wonder, how close are we to that?
I'm not too worried, to be honest.
Okay.
Well, my GPS still gives me horrible directions. So until it can get better at that, I'm not going to be too worried.
Well, there's the technology that is available to the masses, and then there's the technology that's available to governments and the elite, and that's different technology. So I'm not worried about my phone, but maybe I should be worried about what governments are using, or maybe I should be worried about what Elon Musk's people are creating, or there's that. So Elon Musk seems to be worried about the AI apocalypse. So I don't. Not that I worry about Elon Musk, but in a lot of ways.
Yeah. How is he worried about the AI apocalypse? I try to ignore him.
Yeah, so do I. So I don't know enough about it other than headlines that I see. I don't click on them because but he seems to be worried about it. Maybe I'll look into it now.
Yeah.
But there's all these different YouTube channels that are dedicated to his worry about the AI apocalypse.
Right. Well, I think that with not knowing what his concerns are, but kind of going back to that singularity, it seems to me that one of the ideas there is that somehow our technological advances are going to reach such a state that we can either merge with our technology or, and this is, and I think that Elon Musk is all down with this, that we can somehow transcend our our bodies and
Yeah.
find immortality
Mhm.
by uploading our consciousness into the cloud or computers or
Right.
some kind of database or something.
Right. That transhumanism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I don't know that that's ever going to be possible because
Mm.
I think that you have a very, it seems to me that that is predicating that mind is somehow material,
Hmm.
maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, if you think about it, if you do translate your mind into a digital form, do you still have a mind in your brain? I mean, are
Yeah,
we still in this body?
right,
We're not really transitioning into a digital form. We're creating a digital form that mimics us.
right,
And so it doesn't change our lives at all, but it creates something else.
right. There, it's like a
And
clone.
and
Right.
and is it, yeah, exactly. Is it us or is it a copy of us?
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, and can we be us without a body anyway?
Right.
Because that
It
seems to be
depends on
a
the
substantial
situation.
different, right?
Right.
And I'm also always concerned with these ideas of trying to achieve some kind of immortality,
Hmm.
because I honestly don't think that a lot of people actually really consider what
Right.
immortality would be like. And
Hmm.
as I often
Yeah.
say, what scares me isn't death, but deathlessness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a concept of the good place, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
the idea of deathlessness
Yeah. So
without going into
eventually,
any
yeah,
for those who haven't
eventually,
seen it.
yeah, for eventually we're going to be like, God, I'm bored.
Yeah. Sitting there drooling, it's like, oh, let's go for ice cream again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, it would be frozen yogurt stuff.
Frozen.
Hmm.
Yeah, with gummy bears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good enough, but not quite good enough, right?
Hmm.
Bad place. Where else is the apocalypse in? Like, it's in religions, and is it in every religion? I know it's in the Abrahamic traditions because there's the
Hmm.
in Judaism, Christianity. I know in Islam. I think that there's also apocalyptic aspects to Hinduism with the Kali Yuga.
Hmm.
And I think there's even a kind of apocalyptic aspect in Buddhism
Hmm.
with Maitreya, the Buddha to come.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
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 But I think we haven't really
And
defined what the characteristics of apocalypticism is.
Yeah.
I mean, how can we look at the characteristics? Is it in other religions if we haven't really kind of talked about what it is?
Mm.
Is it just the end of the world, or is it something more specific to that? Are there characteristics that go along with the apocalypse?
Yeah. I think that there is, I don't know if it's the end of the world, but it's the end of a world. It could be the end of a world or the end of a time.
Hmm.
An end of a time
mhm.
period. But there's definitely some kind of what's the magic word today? Eschaton. Um,
Eschaton?
Yes.
um, there's definitely something of an end. That something is coming
Hmm.
to an end, either a
Right.
time, a world, a world structure,
State
even
of,
perhaps.
state of
Hmm.
being.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, late stage capitalism, right? We're
hmm
ending.
Hmm.
Certain era is
Right.
coming to an end. We can't keep going where we're going. There's only so much that the earth can offer, and so we can't have endless growth.
right,
So
Right.
at some point, we're going to have to realize this and change what we're doing in terms of how we produce stuff.
right.
And
Hmm.
that's going to radically alter everything.
hmm
Right.
How we work, we produce things, how we see ourselves in the world. So that would be an apocalypse
Right.
because how I'm living right now will be radically different than
Right.
what I'm doing now versus what I'm doing after that.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
And an apocalypse could be, for anybody. I'm imagining the people who live in Pakistan going through the floods that happened last year,
Mm.
um, where over a third of the country was underwater. That's
Right.
an apocalypse. That's
Right.
And how many people are going through, these radical earth changes that are occurring for them. Again, that's climate issues, but it doesn't even have to just be climate issues. It could be someone coming in and conquering a country and taking it over.
Mm-hmm.
That's an apocalypse for them. Um, Life will never be the same. It's going to be different. So
Right.
it might take a generation or so for people to, level out, become,
Mhm.
used to what
Right.
the conditions are.
Mm-hmm. So it's more like
So
a
I don't know how.
transition, a radical
Yeah,
transition to a new.
I'm
I'd
also
say a radical transition
I
could
also
be termed
think
about.
a way to look at this is that it is the beginning of a new story.
Mm.
I've been thinking about this. I have students right now online having a discussion. We look at this week in a intro to philosophy class. It's the question of God. And what I do is it's a short-term course, so they have two discussions. So one is the question of theodicy, and then the other is I have them read Thomas Berry, his article, The News Story, and look at some of these. There's a really famous article, I have them read this too, called The Roots of the Environmental Crisis by UCLA historian Lynn White Jr., and this was published 55 years ago. I think it came out in 67, where he argued that it was the Western story that's found in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 that essentially says, yeah, humans have dominion over everything.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, this is where this is where the ecological crisis starts in. And
Right.
what he argues is that you need to have kind of a different story. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Berry is saying, is we need a new story. And I had one student in particular where this was kind of coming up, because could not see beyond the framework of this late stage capitalism, and was saying, "Oh, but no, we're using all of these resources, and we're supposed to use all of these resources because they're making our lives better. We're
Mm-hmm.
making everything better for humanity." And I couldn't help myself because students don't engage in conversation. They just, they're like, well, I'll post to meet the deadline. So I responded. I'm like, okay, well, let's look at the world that is so awesome, that has been created, that you think is great and that we should continue. And so I started listing things like, well, we are in the sixth major mass extinction. It's something
Mm-hmm.
like 30 or 27% of all mammals are threatened with extinction. I think it's like 41% of amphibians, and my numbers can be off here, but
Right.
these are massive, massive numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And, climate change is going to lead to more war. It already
Mm-hmm.
has. The war in
Right.
Syria was largely predicated on drought. We're
Mm-hmm.
actually going backwards in terms of global hunger and
Mm-hmm.
starvation. The numbers are increasing.
Mhm.
It's getting worse. And then floodings and continued droughts and all of this stuff. And it's like the story. This is that's a different story, and that's an apocalyptic story in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But the old story is just it's become so obviously fictional.
Right. Right. It worked up to a point, but
Yeah.
we're past that point. And if you're still holding onto the same story, you're going to have trouble making that transition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's that idea of whether or not this world is for utilitarian
Hmm.
value or if it's intrinsic value. If it's instrumental or intrinsic, does it have its value in and of itself?
Hmm.
And if it has value in and of itself, should we be just, using it for mass production of stuff?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Or should we be putting aside portion, saying no, we have to see ourselves as a small part of a much larger picture because it all has
Right.
value,
Yeah.
Hmm.
whether or not
Yeah.
we're using it.
Yeah. Well, I bring all this in because I think that maybe part of the apocalypse and I don't know if we want to call it the apocalyptic archetype or
Hmm.
structures of apocalyptic literature, I think that there's always a new story that's involved.
Right.
So, there's a old world, new world,
Hmm.
old story,
Hmm.
new story.
Hmm.
Right. That
And
makes sense.
there, there's a lot of, I think a lot of what we talk about is based in something horrible happening,
Mm,
catastrophic,
yeah.
when we talk about apocalypse. But there is a branch of apocalyptic understanding where there's actually an attempt to build a utopia,
Mm,
in
Hmm.
in the post-millennial understanding of um, of apocalyptic literature, something that came out of the mid 1800s, like 1830s, 1840s. There's this idea of we can build a better future,
mm,
and we see this in the abolitionist movement,
mm-hmm,
Hmm.
that we can create a utopia.
mm,
And then we bring about what was the millennium of, where Jesus comes back, and there's this uh, basically heaven on earth for 1,000 years, and
Right.
um, and this was during the Second Great Awakening. Um, all this pre-Civil War in the United States. Uh, but this idea was that we can create this. This is something that
Right.
that was within our own grasps,
Hmm.
and then really that kind of that idea, and it became more of a no, no, that's not possible. Um, it's something that only God can bring about, and it's going to be catastrophic. Don't even
Hmm.
try. But really, this idea of creating it, and we'll see it in there's a saying called to immanentize the eschaton, and this idea was to bring about the eschaton, which was this. The eschaton is what um, the end time period of that utopia. We can manifest it, and it was that beautiful period, that beautiful 1,000-year period that we bring about. And they're like, no, no, don't do that. You can't do that. So it's like, don't emetize the eschaton. Um, and I think you could see it. It actually comes up in a lot of dystopian literature.
mm,
It's in uh, Robert Anton Wilson's Illuminatus trilogy. It comes up a few times there, and a couple of other science fiction novels of something that you can't do, you shouldn't do, because it just doesn't. It's doomed to failure.
Right.
But yeah, for a while it was a big movement in the United States.
Mm.
yeah, I was thinking of, I think the most famous one I know is and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, the Oneida community. But even though in the 1800s these seem to fail, I would suggest that this idea of creating these utopian communities hasn't gone away. We saw it again in the 1960s with the communes. And I think now what we have are these intentional communities that are trying to focus on raising their own food and being in harmony with the natural environment as well. So I think it's something that's ongoing.
Right.
I would
But
agree
also,
with you, but I think it's been raised out of the Christian community, though. I don't think it's inherent to Christianity any longer. I think it's in the 60s it may have been part of the Jesus movement then. I don't think it is any longer. Or it may have some of those people interested in it, but it's much bigger, much broader than that right now.
Yeah,
Right.
I think. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeremy.
No, I was just going to say, I think there's a lot of communities that have this idea of what their utopia would be like. I mean, even if you look at like libertarians, people have tried setting up libertarian communities. They've all failed spectacularly, but they're still trying to do it.
Yeah. And I don't know that all of the utopian communities in the 1800s were Christian. I think the overwhelming majority of them were. But I think some of them originated out of the sort of ongoing non-Christian trend in the United States that often gets forgotten. That now is kind of, the New Age is partly a manifestation of that. But let's look at the title there, the New Age, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
New Age movement.
Yep.
And that ain't Christian.
Well, maybe it's Christianity with a new skin.
Well, I think it borrows
Yeah,
some.
it does borrow a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of it sounds like the prosperity gospel reimagined without Christ.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that in terms of going back to the 1900s a little bit, something that came to mind, and this is, I think, really applicable, is the social gospel. And I think you can speak a little bit more, Stephanie, to some of this in the sense of kind of the ideas behind all of this, and I'll try my best to articulate them. But my understanding is that when we think in terms of the apocalypse, there's like different versions of how it's going to play out. And one is the idea that there's going to be a rapture and all of the faithful are going to be, raptured up into heavens and everything. And again, I don't know all the timing here, but then I think that Jesus is supposed to rule the earth for like 1,000 years. So you have this these different takes on it, like the premillennial and the postmillennial. Yep. And you can probably speak more to that than I can. But my understanding with the social gospel was the argument was that in order for Jesus to return, we actually had to fix society first. Instead of waiting for Jesus to come back and get rid of all the sinners and make this utopia, the responsibility was on us. And the focus in the social gospel was on the social justice teachings of Jesus and the prophets and whatnot, and trying to make a better society so that we could have that second coming.
Yeah, and that's really a post-millennial idea.
Okay,
that's the idea that that really started during the 19th century, the mid 19th century. That idea and the abolitionist movement, and then people like the Millerites, who became the Seventh-day Adventist. That idea that you fix society, and then you get to this point where Jesus is like, "Okay, things look good here. I'm coming back."
Yeah, good
job. Yeah, good. It's perfect. You've done it. A+. I'm coming back.
Yeah.
So that's where that comes from. The premillennials are like, no, you can't do that. It's going to get worse and worse and
Right,
worse.
right,
And
right.
finally, Jesus is going to say, this is a shit show. we're going, we're going to, I'm coming back and I'm going to clean things up. And
Right.
actually, this actually plays more into the text, the apocalyptic text that we have, because the texts are all about you really can't do anything good or bad. The people aren't capable of making things better or worse or anything. God's got to take care of this. You know,
Right.
the people are really the janitors of the whole thing. Um, you got to believe, you got to be faithful, and um, there's going to be an elect, but really, things are just really bad. You're going to be punished for your iniquities, and God's going to come in and just clean everything up. And some people are going to be saved, and some people aren't. And those who, are good and are faithful, um, they're you're going to be what's left, and there's going to be this great prosperous period that you're going to all be able to enjoy. And then you have, the idea of the rapture, and the rapture is really not biblical at all. It's an invention of Hal
Right.
Lindsey
Right.
in the book The Late Great Planet Earth. And that was basically to deal with the fact that there's this tribulation, right? And it's whether or not Christians were going to have to deal with the tribulation. Those who wanted to deal with, people who didn't want to deal with the tribulation, but those who weren't raptured would have to go through it and have to deal with the consequences of that, which were really bad. If you read the book of Revelations, it's not a pretty time.
And that's just kind of another aspect of punishing the people who aren't good enough, right? That's another form of hell. People who are not raptured. So
yeah, it's hell on earth.
It's a pit of fiery flame.
You might be purified. Yeah, and you could be purified during the process. So if you survive through it, you might be okay in the end, but you have to go through it. But if you were really good before then, you'd be raptured up. And so really that rapture is basically, is it going to be premillennial or postmillennial, and then they fight over it as to when that rapture actually is. And it's really not biblical. There's one biblical accounting that might be referring to it, and it's in one of Paul's epistles, and I can't remember which one it is right now, but it's really an invention.
Yeah, I think with that, I was recently reading because it talks about something like the faithful meeting Jesus upon his return.
Right.
And there's like the language of, or at least it gets interpreted somehow that people, they're just going to like float up to the sky as he comes down from the heavens. But it was in the book I was reading by Bart Ehrman on the apocalypse. I think the title of his book was just Armageddon, where he said, but, again, you always have to put these things into context. And at the time, whenever someone of importance would show up, like a king or, even just below the king, the community would send someone out to greet them. And because that's the context. It's not that, the faithful are going to be lifted up to the heavens, but that the faithful are going to go and welcome him as if he was a king to bring him into the community.
Right.
It's just kind of a welcoming act. But my favorite rapture is still, I think it was in the first season of 6 Feet Under, where you had, the series always had every episode began with a death.
Okay.
And so you had these two scenes where one, you had these workers in a warehouse that were preparing for an adult entertainment award ceremony. And
Okay.
so they had all of these blow up dolls, the blow up sex dolls, but they had filled them with helium, and they had to transport them to where the award ceremony was going to go. And then you flash to this woman who's driving in her car, and she's got the radio set on to some, Christian channel, and they're talking about all these things. And what happens is, in the distance, the truck with all the blow up dolls gets in an accident, and they all get, because they're filled with helium, they float up, and she thinks that that's the rapture. So she slams on her brakes, runs out of her car, and then someone, boom.
I love that scene. Absolutely. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. So whenever I think of the rapture, I think of that.
So it's in Thessalonians 1,
Mm,
chapter 4, verses 16 through 17.
okay.
And that's what they cite as the biblical account for the rapture.
Okay. All right. What was that here?
Just to put it out there.
Thessalonians what?
1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 through 17.
I'm going to find it. Maybe. Just out of curiosity, you two can talk. Carry on.
Oh, no.
You know what? I think I may even have it highlighted here. Maybe. I'm going to see here.
Wow.
Yeah?
Yeah, I do. See? It's... Oh, the other
Hey.
way.
Yes.
And there it is. It's
Hey,
in
it's
pink.
in pink.
Got it.
See, I'm good. I have
Nice.
stuff. Yeah. So, for the Lord himself, with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of God's trumpet, will descend from heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up in the clouds together with them to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words.
There we go.
Yeah, I'm surprised I
Right.
had that highlighted.
There it is.
See a blow up sex doll?
No, I don't.
No.
No. I wouldn't
That's a
mind one
different
of those.
podcast.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind one of those robotic ones talking about AI, but
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, different podcast.
Robotic,
Right.
AI, apocalyptic, sex
Right.
doll
Yeah, it works.
podcast.
Yeah, whole new meaning to the Terminator.
Mhm.
All right, so maybe this is a good time. What are we drinking, Jeremy?
Oh, I am drinking something called the Black Devil, and I assume you two are as well, but I think they're slightly different than mine.
Yeah, they are.
The Black Devil is actually a martini variant that uses rum instead of gin. Nobody knows who created it or when or why. The martini the origin of that is even unclear.
Hmm.
They think it started in the late 1800s, the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, as an evolution of something called the Martinez cocktail in California. But nobody really knows. And so when did they switch out that gin for the rum? Nobody knows. Why is it called the Black Devil? Nobody knows. So that's what I'm drinking.
All right. Well, we have a short video where you walk through everything. So I'm going to pull that up. Hopefully this will work for anyone who wants to see this. And this is on the Kill Divill website or YouTube channel, excuse me.
YouTube channel,
And
yes.
I'll put a link for this also in the show notes in the video description. So let's see how this works.
You want to hold your breath.
Well, it worked before.
It did.
Let me see here. I'm going to try something here. There we go.
There we go.
Hi, I'm Jer. Welcome to Kill Devil, where we focus on rum and cocktails. Today we are going to make the Black Devil #1. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning to the channel, welcome back. In either case, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy what I'm doing here. Timestamps are down below if you want to go right to the recipe. Otherwise, here's me talking. I got my idea for this drink when I was working on my recipe for the dry palmetto. For those of you who don't know, the dry palmetto is one of the few drinks I actually hate, and there's a video for it on the channel. You can check it out if you'd like. But my thought with the dry palmetto is maybe the issue is not the ingredients, but the proportion of the ingredients, because switching the proportions can change a cocktail dramatically. I also had this thought, gin and vermouth, vodka and vermouth, why not rum and vermouth, like a dry palmetto, but the same proportions as a martini or a vodka martini, a rum martini. Shortly after I had this thought, my friend Noam over at the Gnome's Tavern, and I'll link his channel down below and his video down below, for something called the Black Devil. This is essentially, and by essentially I mean it is exactly a rum martini, what I was working on. So I had the idea, but I didn't really make it up. This is not one of my originals. The history of the martini is unclear. It may be an evolution of an earlier cocktail called the Martinez cocktail, which was popular in the late 1800s, about 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, but nobody really knows. So when did somebody swap out the gin for rum to create the Black Devil #1? We don't know that either. A note on the rum. This cocktail is almost entirely rum, so you're going to want to use a really high quality rum. In my case, I am going to be using a Lander white rum from Far North Spirits. If you can get it, use it. If you can't get it, too bad. Use something that you like. A low quality rum is just not going to cut it in this cocktail. A Black Devil, like any good martini, is stirred, not shaken. Sorry, James Bond. So we're going to stir this Black Devil. So we're going to start with our rum. 2 ounces of white rum. 2 ounces is 60 milliliters. Then half an ounce of your dry vermouth. Half an ounce is 15 milliliters. Add your ice. And give it a stir. Then we're going to strain it into our cocktail glass. Now the garnish. The traditional garnish for this drink is olives, either 1 or 3, never 2 for some reason. I don't know why. However, my friend Noam, when he made his, did a twist of orange, which I think is excellent. However, because I'm making the traditional version, I'm going to use 3 olives. And that's it. The Black Devil. Drink with good spirits.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have some questions, though.
Okay.
Well, first comment. I'm just drinking straight up rum. I would never put the vermouth in anyway, so I'm just going to be...
So it's a very, very dry Black Devil.
Well... I guess it's good rum.
I put vermouth in mine.
Nice.
Well, good for you. It doesn't matter what kind of martini, you just pretend to put the vermouth in. I think that's what my close ancestor Winston Churchill had to say. But not a close ancestor, but like fifth cousin or something like that, or cousin 5 times removed. So why stirring rather than shaking? What's the difference? Why is stirring important?
So it's about chilling the cocktail. Both of them are about chilling the cocktail. Shaking has the extra advantage that it mixes things that are harder to mix together at the expense of more dilution. So if you shake something, you're going to get more water in it. But you can mix things like syrups and juices and alcohols together that normally don't mix well. The other thing is that when you shake things, you lose some of the subtle flavors because the volatiles will shake out. They call it bruising the spirit. So you stir things that have really a high quality but subtle flavor that will mix well together. So vermouth is alcohol based, rum is alcohol based. I'm using a really nice rum, so I don't want to lose those extra subtle flavors. So you're going to stir that cocktail.
How long did you stir before you went all Quicksilver there?
They say until it's cold enough. It's a cop-out answer, but it depends on the type of vessel you're stirring in. I'm stirring in glass. If that vessel's been chilled or not, and I was not chilled. So I'm going to stir until I think the drink is cold enough and I can feel it in my fingers. That's why I'm holding the glass at the bottom there, so I can feel how cold it's getting. But if you're using a metal container, some people say that works better because it doesn't absorb as much cold from the alcohol. That doesn't make any sense physically, but or if you chill your stirring glass first, then you don't need to stir as long.
Okay. All right. Okay. I think those are my only questions.
Okay.
But yeah, but still, I mean, I just essentially have a glass of rum. But I know someone who, because I always drink vodka martinis, and I know someone who insists that there's no such thing as a vodka martini, that all martinis are supposed to be made of gin. And she says, if you have like a vodka martini, you just have a glass of vodka. So I just have a glass of rum. So.
Right. I understand her point, but I'm going to disagree.
Oh, good. Yeah.
There's several different definitions of martini, and one of them is the strict definition. It has to be gin and it has to be dry vermouth, otherwise it's not a martini. But there's also the broader category is like anything that comes in a cocktail glass, which has been colloquially called a martini glass. Any drink that comes out in one of those glasses is a martini. So then you can start putting any sort of spirit in there at all. And there's somewhere in between, right? So this is a rum martini. It's not strictly a martini, but I would consider it is a martini because it's got the vermouth and the spirit. So it becomes more of a process of making the drink rather than the specific ingredients of making the drink, or just the glass it comes in.
Okay, so technically anything that's in the martini glass, I can refer to as a martini.
In the broader sense, yes. But if you go to cocktail snobs, they're going to roll their eyes at you so hard.
That's fine. I'm used to people rolling their eyes at me. So as long as I have my tequila in a martini glass, I can say I'm having a martini.
Right, right. Especially if you leave the worm in the bottom of the glass.
I've not done that yet. And isn't that just in mezcal?
It's in one type.
Yeah.
Because most mezcals don't have the worm either.
I think I could do the worm now. There were many years ago, I tried this. I had the worm in whatever tequila or mezcal I was drinking, and I got down to the end where it's just the worm. And I remember I had it, and I think I was holding on to it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I did that for like half an hour in my kitchen, and then I dropped it. So I never ate the worm.
That worm was not raptured, is what you're saying.
Yeah, to bring this back to the topic, that would have been my apocalypse. No worm.
Yeah.
Poor worm.
Well, we've got... I know.
And it would have been the apocalypse of the worm. So.
Well, it was already dead, so...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and eating the worm would have been your personal apocalypse, a transition from one story to the next.
Maybe.
Yeah, you would have been a different person.
Pre-worm and post-worm.
Yeah. One of these days I'll eat the worm.
There's no need to do that, just so you know. That's only something college kids do.
Yeah, really.
Well, I would say that it would be more than college kids because the worm has been in the bottle for a long time.
True.
And I don't know. My guess is that because tequila is made out of agave, right? Mm-hmm. That it probably came from the agave plant, and at some point, it ended up maybe it was fairly common. It ended up in the tequila bottles, and they're like, "Ah, screw it. We'll just,"
Right.
you know.
It happened once by accident. It became tradition at some point, and yeah.
Yeah. Right. Right. Well, that happens so often in so many different things. But yeah, let's get back to the apocalypse. The apocalypse waits for no one. So we've got the biblical apocalypse. Maybe let's talk for a few minutes about apocalypse in popular culture, because one of the things I was thinking of as this moves forward, because I would like to do this once a month and probably schedule it on the second Saturday of every month, since this is the first one we did. And we're coming up with a lot of different topics that we can explore, or that can be explored with this in a little bit more depth. But I was also thinking that as it appears in popular culture, it may even be possible at some point to do some viewing parties of some things.
Right.
And I think that right now, one of the more common apocalypse narratives that we have are the zombies. The zombie apocalypse. Yeah. And I think zombie apocalypse, with our traditional zombies, where they want to eat your brains or your intestines, there's that idea of consumption. And Romero in the second, the Dawn of the Dead, they were in the shopping mall, and so there's this idea of consumption, and that's, you've got your late stage capitalism in there. And I know that The Walking Dead has been seen as apocalyptic, although I stopped watching that after they killed off Glenn.
I stopped before then. So.
Yeah. But what other, in popular culture, what other apocalypses are there?
Superhero movies or superhero shows.
How so?
Yeah.
Also, there's always the end of the universe. Like, I don't know if you follow the Marvel movies at all. They had the huge Thanos sequence where he snapped his fingers and destroyed half the life in the universe. Right. And they always have these huge, major world-ending fights at the end. And then you have to ask, does anything change? Which maybe, is this really apocalyptic if nothing changes? But, that's something we could take a look at too.
Yeah. Well, Thanos is such a utilitarian. Is utilitarianism apocalyptic?
He's also very short-sighted, but that's another subject.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have the techno apocalypses, like the Terminator, which I think was more the 90s,
right,
80s and 90s. There are those. A lot of the genre back in the 80s, I think we had a lot of just downright religious apocalypses in the pop culture, but I think it was informed by the language of Reaganism. With the end of the Cold War era, I think right before the end of the Cold War era with Reagan, with the talk of Star Wars. Not in terms of Star Wars the movie, but Star Wars, what was going on in space with weapons.
Right. Space Force.
So a lot of so a lot of that was, I think, informed by the political situation of the time. I'm trying to think of some of the movies at the time, but
Night of the
I can't
Comet.
think of the name of it right now.
Night of the Comet.
Night of the Comet. There was one with Michael Biehn, and he was in so many back then.
Yeah.
The Seventh Sign, I think, was with Demi
Oh
Moore.
yeah.
Michael Biehn.
Okay.
And I think so much of that was just part of the political movement.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah.
Well, and that also, I mean, just focusing on Reagan a little bit. It's funny because I often want to take a picture of this because when Reagan got elected, I was like 12 or 13, and I still have my journal from that time. And I remember that my hometown right now it's like totally conservative. I think it was a little bit less conservative back then, but it totally went to Reagan. My entire family voted for Reagan. But 13-year-old Nick was not on board with Reagan. And the day of the inauguration, I still have this in my journal. I wrote, "It is the apocalypse. It is the end of time," because Reagan just got sworn in as president. So there's that. And the second thing is that my understanding is that he was actually pretty influenced by Hal Lindsey's books, The Late Great Planet Earth. And there's also in the environmentalism. He had
Hal Lindsey in his cabinet.
Did he? Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Do you know what his position was? What role he played?
I don't know. Prophet? I don't know.
Well,
I don't know if he had an official title.
Yeah. Well, I know his Secretary of the Interior was, I think, James Watts, I think was his name. And Watts was very famously kind of fundamentalist Christian and apocalyptic in his view. And no one wanted him as because before, this it's like the same thing that Trump did with Betsy DeVos. So Trump, this was not new under Trump. You get a critic who is trying to dismantle something, and then you put them in the position where they can do that. And Watts had actually sued the EPA several times. And so, what does Reagan do is he makes him head of the, in the interior. So he governs all of our wildlands and everything. And speaking before Congress, he's like, well, yeah, we want to be able to, keep enough to keep us, safe and, fed and everything. But I really don't know how many years we have before the end times occur. And that's a paraphrase, but he literally said that.
Yes.
Yeah.
These were going on. Yeah.
Yeah. And
that was one of the problems. They didn't really foresee a reason why to have a good environmental policy.
Right.
Because what do you need it for?
Yeah.
It's going to end soon.
Yeah. Well, and I also remember two other things. One is that people were like, Ronald Wilson Reagan. Each one of those has 6 letters in it. 666. And the other major world leader at that time was Gorbachev. And remember, Gorbachev had that stain on his head? Yeah. And people are like, it's the mark of the beast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that intersection of politics and religion as far as apocalyptic, I can't even say that. Yeah. Apocalyptic, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
That sort of intersection is very interesting because sometimes the religion serves as a mirror and a way to express the politics, but sometimes the politics serves as a way to express the religion.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and we've seen this with Trump as well with his election, and those who are supporting him and why.
And when's he coming back? He's going to be reinstated into power. Isn't that kind of a messianic message? Yeah, I hear you, Nick.
No. Wait. Which one is being reinstated?
Trump.
Oh, yeah.
He's coming back into power, right? He's got his followers that believe this. Isn't that an apocalyptic message? No?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned.
I'm sorry.
I'm just thinking I should have kept the rum bottle over here because if we're going to talk about this, I'm going to need to refill my martini glass.
Subject for another session.
Yeah.
I'm just saying the intersection of the two.
Well, yeah, and it's played a role also in our relationship with Israel in many ways. And I know, Stephanie, you wrote about this in your master's thesis, but we saw this especially under the George W. as well, and how we relate to Israel. And because people think that there's this idea that the temple has to be restored for Jesus to come back, and that
Yeah,
Israel,
the building of the third temple, is a big part of what was once termed Christian Zionism.
right,
You had to build that third temple before anything else could happen, and then there were all these conditions built upon what had happened before the third temple can be built.
right. Yeah, and
Get
the
into
big,
that.
and the major problem, of course, is the Dome of the Rock is there, and and back in the 70s and 80s, people were trying to blow that thing up.
Well, yeah, and there's also the difference between why would they build the third temple, because Judaism today is rabbinical Judaism. It's not built on a priesthood.
Right.
So would
But do
when you
Christians
think
care about
about
that?
Some, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, if you have if you build the third temple, you would have to have a priesthood. You'd have to have something like the sacrifices. I mean,
Right.
why would they want that? That's not part of what they do today.
Right.
There's all sorts of conditions that are built into that whole idea of building the third temple that just don't make sense in a modern context.
Yeah.
Right.
But you do have some Jews who do want to see the third temple built.
Right.
It's a small minority, but there are some.
Yeah, and I know nothing about this, but I would imagine that there are still apocalyptic strains in some forms of Judaism.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's apocalyptic strains in every single faith. So people are trying to bring about the end of something.
Yeah.
Beginning of something else.
Right.
Or like the New Age with the Aztec calendar and that sort of thing.
Yes.
There too.
Yes. The 2012. I had that on the list. I actually have a book on that that I was going to get rid of, and then I thought, no, I should probably keep this because that will probably come up at some point.
Right.
Yeah, the Eschaton at the end of time, our late great Terence McKenna talked a lot about that, and I think that his vision was a kind of apocalyptic vision. So that's another upcoming episode, the apocalypse and the mushroom. I'm going to look forward to that one.
We won't be.
I would look forward.
Yeah. Going back to kind of the popular culture a little bit. I mean, I think superheroes, there's probably an aspect, and I just want to do a shout out to Buffy because she was always fighting the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Right.
But in popular culture, something else I think would be conspiracy theories in a sense.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because there's a unveiling of what has been hidden.
Right.
Yeah. And so one of my questions, and this is something that can be explored later, but I'm curious to know what the two of you think about this. But we have in the apocalypse, I think one of the key ideas or forms of the archetype is this revelation. But is there also a gnosis involved?
In terms of conspiracy theory?
In terms of apocalypse in general. In conspiracy theory, absolutely, because people are like, I have seen the truth. I now know.
Right.
Yeah. But I was curious if there is a Gnostic, to use that phrase, and I know that there were Gnostic apocalypses. But is there a sense of gnosis in apocalypse?
Yes, because there is this idea of being able to reach this gnosis of the perfection of society. And that's one of the ideas of what that I'm going to say it wrong. now because I've had my drink. Emenetizing the Eshkatan is that idea. They see it as yeah, right. And I'm out of. I drank my drink. There's that idea of being able to envision that perfection through gnosis, and then the idea of materializing it, making it become a reality. So that idea is inherently Gnostic, and is seen that way by some. But it's also seen as problematic because it's seen in both ideas of well, you see it in ideas of Nazism, ideas of it's not inherent in that, but it comes up as that. So you have people who think they've reached these things that really maybe haven't, or but you certainly have cultures and groups that believe they have these Gnostic revelations, and whether or not they've actually achieved it. So there's this problematic ideal of it, of the Nazi ideal, of course, is the that Aryan perfection, right? And so is it Gnostic? Well, most of us would say no, it's not, but they would say it was. So there's the problem that's inherent with that. Others say, oh, there's a communist aspect of it, or there's
Well,
yeah.
interesting that you mentioned this, and my gosh, I'm a horrible human being because I don't always remember people's names. I'm going to look at this. I'm going to try to talk and do something at the same time. Let's see if I can manage this. I interviewed someone not so long ago, and their book was about the occult in Russia. And one of the things that I'm going to start losing my train of thought because I'm trying to do too many things here. One of the things that he was arguing or writing about was that Russia has this belief, not necessarily out of communism, but it seems to be rooted in more of the Russian traditions and folk traditions of that Russia is meant to lead the world, to be a spiritual leader for a new age. And apparently that is running really strong right now in Russia. And I want to get the fellow's name here because I want to be, it's Christopher. I know his first name's Christopher, and all apologies to him. Because Christopher McIntosh. I knew it was a Mc something. I wanted to get the name right. Occult Russia was the name of his book. And they also there's also an environmental aspect to that too, where there is this movement, and I forget off the top of my head what it's called, but it's centered on a female figure that is connected to an image out of Revelation of like the woman clothed in the sun.
The sun, yeah.
Yeah.
Revelation 12.
Yeah. So we actually have, apocalyptic movements and ideas and ways of viewing the world, not just in the United States, because that would be Orthodox Christianity over there, the Greek, Russian Orthodox.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will, in terms of like a Gnostic ideal, I would say that, and I don't want to knock Gnosticism because I adore Gnosticism, but to me it's always personal, it's individual revelation that you can't share because it's so imminent within one's personal experience.
Right.
When you socialize it, like try to use that in a communalistic way, you really can't do that because it's no longer personal revelatory. It's now something that you're trying to impose.
Right.
And it no longer works. It's no longer something that is a personal revelation that you have achieved. It's now something that you are imposing. So that's one of the things I want to say. I'm not knocking Gnosticism, but rather this idea, like the Russian use of it here, or the Nazism of it, of something that we can build upon, this utopian ideal that becomes horrific because now we're trying to impose something that is not meant to be a communal shared thing.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
It seems ironic when, it's not supposed to be a communal shared thing, but yet we also have this history of the building of communities to precisely create something, a utopia that is shared.
Yeah, and the thing is I think we see this vision, we want to create this vision because we know that we can make this wonderful for everybody.
Right. It's great for us.
In its essence,
Yeah.
no. it's just inherently personal.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that, because it's, it turns into these things that become horrific in how it's executed. It becomes, well, we have to get rid of those people because those people are screwing it up for us. And that's obviously not good.
Yeah, but that's inherent in the book of Revelation. God and Jesus in Revelation, they are bloodthirsty. And anyone who doesn't agree, get rid of them.
Right.
And that's inherently a problem of lifting a text out of its historical context, right?
Right.
What happens when it goes from the historical context and gets lifted into a cosmic context. It's no longer these people living at this time in history, and now it's cosmic. It's battle of good and evil, right and wrong.
Right. And that's part of we talked a little bit about characters as apocalypticism, but that's part of it too, isn't it? That black and white way of seeing the world. We are creating this utopia. We are the good people. Anyone who's not supporting that is suddenly a bad person.
Yes. And therefore we should get rid of them, or they shall suffer for eternity in a pit of lava.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah. So
like a fire.
Yeah. So is there still, kind of jumping back to the New Age, another kind of apocalyptic thing that I can think of is, and I'm not entirely as well versed in this as I would like to be, but in some magical circles, I'm thinking particularly of Crowley, the Aeon, the birth of the new Aeon.
Oh, I don't know enough about it.
Yeah,
it seems to me that's probably a little bit apocalyptic as well. And I think that it got picked up by sort of or has parallels with much of the New Age thought as well. Do you think though that there's still a apocalyptic aspect to the New Age? And I'm also a little bit curious as to whether or not the New Age is still a thing. I don't know that people really identify as being New Age anymore, so much as they identify as being spiritual but not religious.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's more into like their little subcategories, rather than I'm New Age. I think it's more like
Mm.
specific to really subcategories of that. I'm blanking now on what I would.
Well, I think
Right. Like
those.
they used to be an
Categories, I would
umbrella,
say.
like everyone was part of that, like Wicca and Asatru and all these other things used to be included as parts of the New Age, but now they're enough adherents that they're kind of separating themselves into their own communities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely right.
Yeah, and I would say that the Wiccans, I don't think they started out identifying as New Age. I think it's others who are saying, "Oh, that is New Age."
Right. Is an exteriorly applied category.
Yeah.
All this together is New Age because you're not us.
Right. Yeah, and that's interesting. I don't remember who came up. Well, the idea of the New Age, I think, is found in the writings of Alice Bailey, who was a theosophist. After Madame Blavatsky, I think that she led the theosophist movement for a while, and I think that's where the idea of the New Age came from. But then eventually others started applying it, saying, "Oh, well, New Age is this, New Age is this, New Age is this."
I'd also say there's a lot of things that are categorized as New Age that don't necessarily aren't New Age. They've been along a lot longer.
Right.
So I think anything that isn't part of the Western monotheistic tradition is also always thrown into New Age, and it's not. It's not always a good way to categorize it.
Yeah. Well, and I know we're kind of running out here because we're trying to keep this at no longer than 90 minutes. So we actually have about 8 minutes left, and then, oops, party over, out of time. But
sing it.
No, that's not going to happen. But if I could get the rights to that, I'd play that song in this. That's what we'd start with this as. Now I don't remember what I was going to say.
Sorry.
Dang it.
Jeremy.
Yeah. Well, that thought's gone. But what else? What are we missing? And this is an ongoing conversation. And my idea here for this first episode was just to have a general conversation about the apocalypse and areas that we can go into for future episodes where we can go much more in depth. And I also want to invite anyone who watches this to leave comments on anything that they would like to see us address in future episodes in terms of the apocalypse. But I guess my question that I forgot was, do you think that there's still a apocalyptic dimension to the New Age, if even New Age is still a thing?
That's a good question. I think that's a good question to explore in another episode.
Yeah.
Trying to help you tie this up here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is, and
yeah, I do too.
I think, I think it's going to take me a little while to come up with some of it off the cuff. I'm not.
Right. If we're talking about revelation of a new world and stuff like that, then certainly there's a portion of that. If the New Age still exists, or if you talk about the different portions of it, there's still those threads in there.
Yeah. Well, my guess is that it's still there because I think one of the dominant ideas is still this language of paradigm, and that we need a new paradigm, or that there is a new paradigm emerging. And maybe I'm always suspicious of people who announce new paradigms. But I do think that we are, in many ways, looking at a new paradigm. And for me, and I don't know if this is apocalyptic in any way, I think in terms of paradigms, from the source where it comes from was Thomas Kuhn's The Structures of Scientific Revolutions, and that, you know, science operates off of these paradigms, these sort of axioms and premises, but there's always an anomaly that paradigm can't answer, and it is trying to answer that anomaly that gives rise to the new paradigm. And for my money, the anomaly right now is consciousness. And that's what's going to create a new paradigm, if you will. And it seems to me that that may be exactly where New Age thought can actually come to play and have a voice in this, because there is so much emphasis on consciousness, and there's a lot of things that may be not quite right, you know, but there, I think that's there.
It does seem as though there is in science, the idea of a new paradigm emerging in terms of consciousness, and there's a fight going on between materialism and something else that's just emerging as well. Materialism isn't working, and so all these different ideas are coming to the forefront, and you know, one of them is like panpsychism, you know, and the idea that we are not reduced to just the brain, like there's something else going on that's, you know, that's producing all these thoughts in our brain that have nothing to do with the actual material, you know, and all these different theories that are emerging, and it is truly a fight. So whatever emerges from that, it's time for a different paradigm there, because materialism just doesn't answer the question.
Right. This whole idea of the fight.
So that will be an unveiling.
Right. Yeah. And that either or question, materialism or what, the dichotomy, suddenly that becomes apocalyptic as well.
Yeah, because before we have that, you know, some type of answer, there's going to be all sorts of craziness hitting the fan, right? Because that's what happens.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, I think that with the panpsychism, you know, I tend to lean in that direction, but then there's also this idea of animism. And I think the value of animism is that, you know, panpsychism still kind of relies on a body. It still kind of relies on a brain in a sense. It relies on a physicality, but with animism, it doesn't. And that opens up even more doors. And I think that what happens is there's that defensiveness of, you know, and I see this in myself where it's like, yeah, no, I am not going to let the fairy king into my world. That is not something that is allowed.
Come on, Nick.
You know, but you know, if you have an animistic sort of worldview, that you have to accept, you know, the reality of disembodied consciousnesses, right? And at that point, you're like, well, maybe there is a fairy king. I don't know. I still don't want to let him in there in the house. So, but anyway, there's
fairy queen. It could be a fairy queen.
Oh yeah. I don't mean to be all masculine and patriarchal there. So thank you.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Why I had to tell you, but.
Yeah. Well, it's because I always see women talking about their relationships with the fairy king. I've not heard any man talk about their relationship with the fairy queen yet. But point taken.
Because that's the world we live in.
Yeah. And we need a new one. So therein lies the apocalypse. So, all right. We got 90 minutes. So thank you both. This was a lot of fun. I look forward to future conversations. A little bit more in depth as we explore these things. So thank you. Any final words before we end this?
Eschaton? Is that what I'm supposed to say?
Eschaton.
Eschaton and eschatology. Yeah. And the transcendent object at the end of time.
Yes.
So, all right. Well,
the singularity.
Yeah, there we go. All right.
Singularity.
Well, thank you. May we all survive.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, may we all survive the apocalypse.
We will. Well, we won't, but us will, or something.
Maybe.
Change the narrative.
All right, here.
I'm trying.
All right. Drink's over.
All right. Have a good day.
All right, you too. Thank
Take
you.
care.
Until next month.
Yeah, until next month. I don't know the exact date, but the second Saturday of the month.
Okay.
And I will post it on social media, on Facebook, and we'll start advertising this a little bit more to get a few more viewers here. But this was a trial run, so thank you both. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.